The clinking of chains echoed through the dark, wet halls of Carthage prison. Two women were pulled deep into the Roman Empire's cold dungeons. One was rich, the other was a servant. One held her tiny newborn baby, the other carried a baby in her belly. But they shared something the Romans feared more than any sword: their Christian faith. In the year 203 AD, Perpetua and Felicitas were given one of the most cruel punishments ever imagined. They would be forced to suffer for hours under the hot sun inside the Carthage arena as thousands of people watched and cheered. Their story is not just about pain, it is about how strong the human spirit can be, even when facing the worst cruelty in the world. Roman Africa in the 3rd century was a cauldron of religious and social tensions. Carthage, Rome's former rival, had become one of the empire's most prosperous provinces, but also one of its most restless. Christianity was growing rapidly among all social classes, from slaves to nobility, challenging the religious and political foundations of Roman power. Emperor Septimius Severus himself, born in Africa, knew well the dangers of this new religion that preached loyalty to a heavenly king above the earthly emperor. During his reign, local persecutions intensified throughout Roman Africa, possibly encouraged by regional governors eager to demonstrate their loyalty to the emperor through the suppression of Christians. Vibia Perpetua was born into the aristocracy of Carthage, daughter of one of the region's most influential families. At 22 years old, she was a young mother who had recently given birth to a baby and enjoyed all the privileges her social position could offer. Educated in the finest Roman traditions, she spoke Latin and Greek fluently, knew classical literature, and had been raised to assume her role as a respectable matron of society. However, something in her young heart yearned for a purpose greater than the social conventions of her time. When she encountered Christian teachings, she found the answers she had been seeking. Felicitas represented the opposite extreme of the Roman social ladder. As a slave in Perpetua's household, she possessed no legal rights nor prospects of freedom. At 20 years old, she was 8 months pregnant when the events that would forever change her life began to unfold. Despite her servile condition, she possessed remarkable intelligence and an indomitable spirit that impressed everyone around her. When Christian teachings reached Perpetua's house, Felicitas embraced them with a passion that surprised even her mistress, finding in the new faith a dignity that Roman society had never offered her. Conversion to Christianity in that era was not a simple or swift process. Future Christians underwent an extensive preparation period called the catechumnate, during which they studied the scriptures, learned fundamentals of the faith, and prepared for baptism. Perpetua and Felicitas were catechumens. They had not yet been officially baptized, though they possibly received baptism while already in prison. Along with them, other young people shared the same journey. Saturninus, Secundulus, Revocatus, and their catechist, Satarus, who had become a spiritual guide for the group. The arrest came suddenly and violently on a March morning in the year 203 Anno Domini. Roman soldiers invaded the residences where the catechumens gathered, dragging them from their beds and brutally separating them from their families. Local persecutions were being enforced with relentless severity, and provincial governors competed with each other to demonstrate their loyalty to the emperor through the repression of Christians. Perpetua was torn from the arms of her crying baby, while Felicitas, in her advanced state of pregnancy, was pushed and kicked by the soldiers who took her to prison. Conditions in Carthage prison were deliberately inhumane. The Christians were thrown into an underground dungeon where darkness was total and the air barely breathable. Dozens of prisoners crowded into a space meant for few without adequate ventilation, sanitation, or privacy. The heat was suffocating during the day and the cold penetrating during the night. Food consisted of rotten scraps thrown on the floor, and water was rationed to the point of causing constant dehydration. Many prisoners died before even reaching trial, which was exactly the authorities' intention. It was in this hellish environment that Perpetua began writing her diary, one of the most extraordinary documents of early Christian literature and one of the first known writings by a woman in Western history. With courage that defies modern comprehension, she recorded not only the physical horrors she faced, but also her mystical visions and the spiritual transformation she experienced. Her words, preserved through the centuries, offer a unique window into the mind of a woman facing the most terrible death for her deepest convictions. Perpetua's father, a pagan man who loved her deeply, made multiple desperate attempts to save her. He visited her in prison repeatedly, begging her to renounce Christianity and save not only her own life, but also the family's honor. In a particularly touching scene recorded in her diary, he threw himself at her feet, calling her daughter instead of lady. A radical reversal of social roles that demonstrated the desperation of a father watching his daughter choose death. Perpetua, with a broken heart but unwavering conviction, consistently refused his pleas, explaining that she could not deny her faith even to save her own life. Meanwhile, Felicitas faced additional anguish. According to Roman law, pregnant women could not be executed until they gave birth. This meant that if she did not deliver before the date set for the public Amy's, she would be separated from her companions in faith and executed alone later. For a woman who had found a spiritual family among the catechumens, the prospect of dying in isolation was almost unbearable. The entire group united in fervent prayer that she might give birth in time to share martyrdom with her brothers in faith. The answer came dramatically. Felicitas went into labor just 2 days before the date set for execution. The pains were excruciating, intensified by malnutrition, dehydration, and extreme emotional stress. During childbirth, her cries of agony echoed through the prison, prompting a sadistic guard to mock her. "If you scream like this now, what will you do when you face the beasts in the amphitheater?" Felicitas's response, recorded by the companions who witnessed the scene, became one of the most powerful statements in Christian literature. "Now it is I who suffer, but out there, another will be in me, and he will suffer for me because I will suffer for him." The trial was a judicial farce that lasted only a few hours. Procurator Hilarianus, charged with executing the imperial edict, offered the prisoners one last opportunity to save their lives through sacrifice to the Roman gods. One by one, they refused categorically. When Perpetua's turn came, the magistrate appealed specifically to her maternal feelings, reminding her that her baby would be orphaned. Her response was simple and definitive: "I will not sacrifice." With those words, she sealed not only her own fate, but also demonstrated a strength of character that impressed even her enemies. The sentence was pronounced with theatrical pomp. The Christians would be exposed to wild beasts during public games celebrating the birthday of Geta, son of Emperor Septimus Severus. This was not simply an execution, but a carefully orchestrated spectacle to humiliate the condemned and terrorize anyone who might sympathize with Christianity. The games would last all day, with different animals being released against the prisoners in successive waves, deliberately prolonging the suffering to maximize the crowd's entertainment. The 7th of March, in the year 203, Anno Domini dawned clear and hot over Carthage. Crowds gathered at the amphitheater from the earliest hours, eager for the spectacle to come. Street vendors offered food and drink. Gamblers made their predictions about how long each prisoner would survive, and the stands seethed with the morbid excitement that characterized Roman games. The amphitheater, with capacity for tens of thousands of spectators, perhaps up to 25,000 people, was completely packed, including local authorities, prosperous merchants, and common citizens, united by their appetite for violence. When the prisoners were led into the arena, a remarkable transformation occurred. Instead of the terror and despair the crowd expected to see, the Christians entered singing hymns and with expressions of serene joy on their faces. Perpetua, in particular, radiated a confidence that confused the spectators. She refused to wear the ritual garments traditionally forced upon the condemned, tunics dedicated to pagan gods, declaring that she had made a contract with the authorities to die as a Christian, not as a pagan. The horror began gradually following the macabre script typical of Roman games. First, the men were exposed to wild animals. A wild boar was released against Satyrus, bears and leopards against Revocatus and Saturnus. The animals, deliberately deprived of food to increase their aggressiveness, attacked with brutal fury. Secundulus died before being taken to the arena, thus spared from the final spectacle. The roars of the animals mixed with the screams of the crowd, creating a cacophony of violence that echoed off the stone walls of the amphitheater. For the women, the spectacle organ, Isers, reserved special cruelty. A wild cow chosen specifically for its symbolism was released against Perpetua and Felicitas. The animal, confused and enraged by the noise of the crowd, attacked Perpetua first, goring her and hurling her violently through the air. She fell hard on her back with brutal force, but immediately concerned herself with rearranging her clothes to maintain decency, showing remarkable presence of mind amid the chaos. When she saw Felicitas fallen and injured, she ran to help her stand, demonstrating solidarity and love. Even in the final moments, the crowd, initially bloodthirsty, began to be disturbed by the extraordinary dignity of the two women. Instead of begging for mercy or showing terror, they supported each other and continued praying aloud. Some spectators began to murmur uncomfortably, involuntarily touched by the courage they witnessed. Roman propaganda intended to show Christians as cowards and traitors, but the spectacle was producing the opposite effect. When it became clear that the animals would not complete the job quickly, the organizers decided to accelerate the process. The condemned were brought to the center of the arena to receive the final blow from the gladiators' swords. But even in this supreme moment, the Christians maintained their extraordinary composure. They embraced each other, exchanged the traditional kiss of peace, and calmly positioned themselves to receive death. Felicitas was the first to be beheaded. The experienced gladiator executed the blow with professional precision, and she died instantly. Perpetua, however, was less fortunate. The gladiator assigned to execute her was a nervous novice, and his first blow missed the target, striking her between the collarbones. Perpetua screamed in pain, the first sound of suffering she had emitted during the entire ordeal. But then, in a final demonstration of control over her own destiny, she guided the trembling hand of the young gladiator to the correct position on her neck, helping him complete the execution. The impact of the martyrdom of Perpetua and Felicitas reverberated far beyond the walls of Carthage's amphitheater. Their deaths did not produce the intimidating effect that Roman authorities had expected. Instead, their example of courage inspired waves of conversions to Christianity throughout Roman Africa and beyond. Perpetua's diary, preserved and copied by admiring Christians, became one of the most influential texts of the early church, read in Christian communities from Spain to Syria. The brutality of the punishment inflicted on these two young women, a noble mother and a pregnant slave, exposed the barbaric nature of a system that confused entertainment with extermination. Even by Roman standards, accustomed to the violence of gladiatorial games, the spectacle was exceptionally cruel. The deliberate choice to expose women to wild animals, deliberately prolong their suffering, and force them to die as public entertainment represented one of the lowest points of Roman civilization. More than 1,800 years later, Perpetua's words still echo with extraordinary power. Her diary offers a unique window into the mind of a woman facing the most terrible death for her deepest convictions. Her refusal to sacrifice her principles even in the face of torture and death established a standard of moral integrity that continues to inspire people of all religions and cultures. The story of Perpetua and Felicitas reminds us that the true measure of a civilization lies not in its monuments or conquests, but in how it treats its most vulnerable members and in its tolerance for those who think differently. The martyrdom of these two extraordinary women remains as an eternal testament to humanity's capacity to transcend fear, pain, and even death when guided by deep convictions and true love.